This is my Dixon Pueblo shirt, and reminds me of home, New Mexico, right? Lots of pueblos in New Mexico, and lots of Native American influence. Um, Ton of Native American culture. Blessed to be a part of that and get to experience that, grow up in that environment. Um, yeah, it's a magical thing. But I am here to tell some stories. I'm kind of excited about that. Do a little catch up. Just a reminder the podcasts, the audio podcasts recorded on Anchor, are on Spotify, and I believe they're also on Apple. Check them out. They're awesome, and there's a lot of them. I am doing some recaps here, catching up to those, and because we also want to present these stories on YouTube, but we want to catch up. So if you're new to the stories, you can just go through the kind of the quick tour that I'm going to do that'll catch us up, or you can do both. It's up to you. But we're super excited to be here, and we would love for you to subscribe to the channel. That's something that we really appreciate if you can do that. So yeah, man, it's been a good week. I had to do some travel and went out to Colorado. Beautiful out there. Mountains are gorgeous. Weather's beautiful. Just perfect. Great place. And man, I love this country. It's just so many amazing, beautiful places, and just something really to love. And love this country. Love the people in this country. It's a great place, man. Good old USA is my home. And so I want to go back. I was remembering a story that I had told about my friend Harley, and it's a great story. And basically, what it is, this is about third grade, right? So I had moved schools. I was no longer at the Vargas, and there wasn't a lot that had happened between those times. Well, there is. I'll tell you this. There is one story. So a little before that, the year before that, at Alvord, I was finally kind of finding my way, getting to know people a little bit, and I had a friend, my friend Alfredo. Alfredo had a glass eye, so he was a cool kid, man. But he had a glass eye, and the eye was a little too big for the socket because he was constantly growing into his glass eye. His parents weren't rich; they're kind of a poor family, and so they did what they could, but they would get the eye a little larger, so then he'd grow into it, and they could save money, save up for the next one, and handle it that way. And so it fit a little awkward, and he got teased a lot. So of course I kind of fit in with Alfredo because I was kind of an awkward kid too. It didn't really fit in. So we were boys, and I was rolling out to see him, right? And that's for lunch. So I'm walking out. I can see he's on the other end of the playground, and I think to myself, all right, cool, I'm going to roll over there. So as I'm running over there, I get hit in the leg by a juice box. And I look down and I see this juice box. And I'm like, what the heck? That's weird. So I look in the direction that it came from, and there's this older kid. He was in the sixth grade. Now remember, I was in the third grade. So I look over at him, and he throws his hands up at me. He's standing there with a girl, right? And I think, oh, that's weird, So I pick up the juice box, and in my head, it's like, all right, well, he threw it at me. You must maybe want me to throw it back. So I throw it back at him, and it hits him, but it still doesn't open, and it falls. And he laughs, and he says, come here. So I run over there, and I'm just a little third grader, sixth grade kid. So I'm running over, and right as I get into his range, boom, drops me. I mean, he did not say a word, just punches me right in the face. I hit the ground. Next thing I know, I wake up, and there's all these kids looking down at me. So imagine I see sky, blue sky in the middle, and then all these little heads. And they're all looking down at me. And they're saying, man, are you okay? Alfredo's one of them, right? He's looking down at me. And are you okay? Are you okay? And so I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. And I get up, And I see him and I'm like, all right, well, my mom taught me, like, you hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. My dad taught me hit first, but I had no idea that this guy was gonna hit me. And so I'm like, all right, I got this, This dude wants to hit me, all right. So I jump up, start walking his direction. But as I'm walking direction, I realize this kid's a lot bigger than me. And, third to sixth grade, that's quite an age difference. So I look over to the side and there's a teacher there. And I run over and I just tell on him instead. And I think that was a good survival instinct at that point. So I tell the teacher, sends us to the principal's office. They call my grandparents. They call his parents. Oh, it's a huge thing. My grandmother threatened him and his mom and said if it ever happened again that she was going to kick both their asses. That's exactly what she said in front of the principal. And I just kind of remember chuckling to myself. And I remember him chuckling too because of her language that she chose to use in front of the principal, which kind of put the principal in shock. But that was that, man. Like, it was what it was. Kid was troubled, I'm sure he may have had some abusive situations going on in his life. And I caught up to him later in life, had a little talk with him. But for that day, he got the best of me. And that was just what it was, and it was literally a talk. As a matter of fact, we ended up laughing about it. So, but then there was my boy Alfredo, and we were still friends, so I come back to school the next day and we sneak off into the bathroom, just goofing off in there, messing around. And Alfredo goes and he would always, and I tell him, like, mocos, right? And people would call him moco eye, which was messed up, right? And so he'd get little mocos in his eye, and then it would look bad. And so I told him, like, hey, bro, clean that off. Just trying to be a good friend so he can get teased later. And so sure enough, he goes, turns on the water, gets a napkin, and he has his back to me. And I hear ding, 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 ding. And I'm like, and he's like, oh no. And I'm like, oh man. And he turns around. And when he turns around, he looks directly at me. And now the glass eye is no longer there. And there's just this patch of muscle or raw skin. I don't know, like just the way they had covered it up or cleaned it up after the surgery. And I look right at him. He looks at me. And I just remember that like image tattooing into my brain, into my soul. And then it was a panic because his glass eye had gone down the drain. So you can imagine for him, now he's got to walk around like that. So, he covers it up and, it was terrible, man. It was actually a little traumatic, the situation. And so it was weird because for years after that, I had this terrible fear of losing an eye. And I couldn't sleep without hugging my pillow, keeping my arms under my pillow, keeping my arms this way, that way, whatever it is, I'd keep my fingers away from my face. I just had this huge fear, like it was a phobia. And it's weird because to this day, I always hug my pillow. I always keep my hands. I'm not really afraid of that as much anymore, but but I have like these habits, right? So yeah, man, that was my boy Alfredo, and I left Alvord School. My grandmother had moved her restaurant, and so she had been getting basically robbed too often. Like her restaurant was on Agua Fria, and there were people. There's rough crowd on Agua Fria, and so people would then break into her restaurant and get all her pots and pans, fill them with beer and wine, and then leave. So they wouldn't only take her beer and wine, but they take all the pots and pans, which means she'd have to go find new pots and pans. And industrial restaurant pots and pans aren't the easiest thing to find, especially when you need them for an entire restaurant all of a sudden. So it's stressful on her. So she wanted to continue to get closer or get to the plaza. And so she kept on making moves trying to make that happen. And at that point, she moved to a restaurant on Agua Fria. Now, this restaurant was right next to a nightclub called Sam's Back Door, which was a gay nightclub in Santa Fe in the 80s. And then there was a Chinese restaurant, and then there was our place, right? Maria Isabel's, it was right next to that. So there's one bar and two restaurants in that area. And everybody got along. It was great, man. My grandmother had a restaurant there. It was busy. I would sing there all the time. I make great tips, make money. And and we go eat Chinese food and anyways, so that's where we were. And the back of that restaurant had this huge parking lot. And so I would go out there and I'd play on my bike. I'd do stuff I loved, riding my bike, man. That was my thing. I'd go work on endos, work on bunny hops. I'd jump it off the loading docks. I just had a great time with it back there, my BMX bike. I would ride freestyle because I could do tricks on flatland. And so I love buying freestyle bikes, So I was able to buy a Haro. I bought a General. I buy them myself. They're expensive bikes, but I save my money and I buy them. And so I was going to school at Nava. I was now a new student there, which was interesting, and we'll talk more about that. But the best part of that move was there was a kid that would play in the back, and he was on the other side of the parking lot. And so one day I went out there and I saw this dog, and it's this Brendel pit bull, and she's walking on the security. So the security barbed wire is always at an angle, so you can't climb in or out, depending on what they're trying to do. And so the security barbed wire is up at this angle, and the dog is walking on the wire, on the security wire, right? She's up top. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So I'm watching her. And then I see there's this kid over there, and he's with the dog, right? And so I walk over. She jumps off, comes and greets me. Sweet little girl. Her name is Brindy, right? I ended up growing up with that dog. But she comes over, and she's wagging her tail. And I introduce myself. I say, hey, I'm Chacho. It's my grandmother's restaurant. He's like, cool, my name is Harley. And this is my parents' welding shop, which we were in the back of at that point. And he said, I also live here. So they lived on a street right there that was called Jorgensen's Lane. And he was Harley Jorgensen. His dad was Michael Jorgensen. His dad's dad was Michael Jorgensen. So that family had been there in Santa Fe and had owned from there all the way to Agua Fria. But because of taxes, they lost a lot of that land. So now only owned, I think, from, I don't know, maybe a few blocks, right? And so we're hanging out, man, and I'm like, cool. I was making a friend. It was awesome, right? Because my only friend, Alfredo, I was on the other side of the city from at that point, and I didn't really know anyone at school. I wasn't clicking much with people, and so I made this dude Harley, and he seems super cool. He likes bikes just like I like bikes, and we're doing our thing. And so he says, hey, man, let me show you my knife, right? And so it's funny because I always carry a knife now. This is the one I have right now. It's a little Cricut, right? And I love it. It's not spring-loaded, very simple. It's not going to break easily. Great blade. Never have had to sharpen it. I love my knife, and I love the color, which, by the way, matches my Pueblo shirt brilliantly. So this is my knife. I love it. I keep it with me every day, right? And so he had his knife, and he pulled it out, and he said, hey, man, check out my knife. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So we look at it, and we're like, yeah, I like that knife. And he said, yeah, I have a sword. I have a sword also. I'm like, oh, that's cool, man. What kind of sword do you have? And he's like, well, I have throwing stars too. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I train throwing stars, but I'm also training with my samurai sword. I have a samurai sword. I'm like, that's impressive. Like, wow. I have like a butter knife at the restaurant that my grandmother lets me cut cardboard when I want to make a cool clubhouse or something, right? And so he's like, yeah, I have a samurai sword, and I train samurai, and I'm training with my throwing stars also. I'm like, dude, that's sick. And he's like, yeah. He's like, it's dangerous though. I'm like, yeah, bro, I'm sure. Like, it's a samurai sword. She's like, yeah, totally dangerous, bro. It's live blade, like it's sharp as a razor blade. I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's crazy. I'd like to see it one day. He's like, yeah, I don't know, but here's the thing: is like one day. So he starts to tell me this story, right? He says, one day I was training with it, and I'm working and I'm training, going through my different forms and stuff like that. He's like, and I just start going faster and faster and faster. And I'm like, wow, dude. Like, this guy's talking about swinging around this samurai sword, right? And now I want to explain to you, Harley. He had like a spiky mullet, feathered, spiky mullet kind of part it in the middle, but spiky and a mullet at the same time. Blonde, light complected, and he was tall. He was tall like me, and broad kid, right? Good looking kid, but so he basically, it's all American boy, but he's telling me he's training like a ninja, right? So I'm like, wow, dude, you're sick. Like, you're a ninja, basically, right? Must be. She's like, yeah, bro. So I'm moving, I'm doing my thing. He's like, and I got super excited, and so I threw the sword straight up in the air. He's like, and I knew that if I timed it, I could catch it right in stride. He's like, so I threw it straight up, right? Now, as he's telling me this story, we had migrated and we're now sitting on the dumpster, the trash dumpster for the restaurant that was at the back of the parking lot. And Brindy's playing around the bottom. And so he's telling me how he threw his sword up. And I'm in awe. I'm like, dude, this is crazy. And he's like, yeah, bro. So it went like 20 feet in the air. And then it was coming down. And right as it's coming down, I realized my timing was off. And I'm like, oh, wow, what happens when your timing's off? And he's like, it was coming down blade first. So now I'm like, dude, that's stressful, right? Like blade first. I don't know what to do about that. Like, what would you do about that? Like a samurai sword, sharp as a razor blade, coming down at you, blade first. He's like, I tried to run away. I moved, but it caught my pant leg, and it cut my pant leg from my hip all the way down to my shoe, and it cut my pants open. I'm like, did it cut you? And he's like, just a little scratch. I'm like, oh, bro, you're so lucky. Is the sword okay? He's like, dude, the sword's so strong, it didn't even hurt it. Like, it hit the ground, no problems. I'm like, whoa. I'm glad you're okay, bro. And he's like, yeah, no, man, I'm fine. I've been training since. But yeah, that happened. And I'm like, wow. And he's like, yeah, dude. Yeah. And I'm like, I like to see it. And he's like, yeah, one day we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I can show it to you one day. So as we're talking, my grandmother comes out the restaurant. And she sees me and this boy sitting on the nasty, disgusting, gross dumpster. So she jumps off the loading dock and yells at us to come inside, to come and to get off that dumpster because it's gross. And she's yelling it and she's waving her hands at us and she's saying, get off that dumpster, blah, 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 blah. And so Harley and I, we go to jump off the dumpster. We don't think any big deal, right? Like, all right, cool, our bad. Well, Brindy sees her yelling at us and feels threatened. Now, this is a protective puppy. She's a little pit bull, right? And she loved Harley. That was, her guy. And then I now had met her, and I'm sure she was protective of me too. We're both kids. And so she takes off across that parking lot. Like, you see it, like when a pit bull or any dog really is in full sprint, that's a fast moving animal. And I'm watching her, and she's moving, and she's growling at the same time. And it's very obvious that she feels threatened by my grandmother who's yelling at us. My grandmother sees her coming, and she's like, whoa. So she turns and starts to jump back up onto the loading dock, which is not that easy of a thing to do. So she's kind of climbing up onto it. And once she gets up, she still has to get to the door. Now, once Brindy gets to that loading dock, she's going to hop it like it doesn't even exist. So this is happening fast, and it doesn't look like my grandmother is going to get out of the way. I mean, to get away. And Harley's like, Brindy, screaming at her. And she's not listening. She's going. My grandmother gets in that door, barely shuts it, and Brindy stops right at the door. I mean, it was like simultaneous, like boom, boom. And we look at each other. I look at Harley. He looks at me, and he's like, whoa, who was that? And I'm like, that's my grandmother. And he's like, oh, my God. So we run over. He gets Brindy, takes her home. And then he comes back. I introduce Harley to my grandmother. She's like, I don't know about that dog. And later on, she got to know Brindy fine, and it was not a big deal. But that was the day I met Harley. Now, here's the thing. I'm telling that entire story because I never, ever, I'm 44 years old now. Harley's been my friend that entire time. Close, like brothers. I've never seen the samurai sword. Never. Now, if you ask me, I say he was telling stories. I say that there is no samurai sword. He never trained. He never threw it 20 feet in the air, and it never cut his pants open. Now, he may tell you different. And here's the funny thing is that he called me because this story exists on Anchor already. He called me a few weeks ago and challenged me and said, he had his mom on the phone. And he said, Mom, what did I have when I was a kid? She said, a sword. Okay, okay. Now, Debbie is a good person. She would never lie. That's his mom. Harley, on the other hand, we'll see. So I said, great. Well, what is this? Was it a samurai sword? And she said, well, I don't know what a samurai sword is. She said, but it had a curve. Now, if you know ninja training and samurai swords like I do, you would know that they're either straight or with a very, 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 I mean, from what I've seen, right? Now, I'm not an expert, but from what I've seen, very slight curve to them. What she was showing me was more of a pirate type sword. And that sword I have seen, and it's not a sword, it's actually a huge knife that opens up like a sword, and it has pirate blood on it. And I know Harley has that in his collections of knives. I've seen that with my own eyes. Now, he is asking because his mom has acknowledged the existence of the pirate knife for me to change the story or say that is the fact that I am challenging him and saying, this is not the truth, Harley. This story you told me the first time I met you, this relationship, this friendship that's gone many years was all started on a lie. It's not the truth. He claims that because of the existence of the pirate story or sword, that I need to retract my statement, that I need to publicly say that. But I am going to maintain my stance until he provides a samurai sword and either his mother, father, or both will say, yes, he had that when he was in the 3rd grade. They may not know he trained so violently, but they would know if he had it or not. Only then will I retract my story. Until that point, my dyslexic life, I stand strong on my story. Absolutely 100%. And that's it, man. Sometimes we got to make a stand. Sometimes we got to make a stand in life, and it doesn't matter what the challenges may be or what you may face. And Harley may have to come on this show, and we may have to have that talk. Either way, I'm standing my ground. So this is my dyslexic knife. Not my dyslexic knife. My dyslexic life. And we're having a great time here, man. Please, please, please subscribe. I hope you enjoy the stories. Hope you enjoy the lessons. I want to inspire you, and I want to make you happy. I want to make sure that you guys just remember how amazing life is and how amazing you can make it. This is a positive place, man, and there's a lot of challenges, but we can get through it all. We can get through any of those things. So keep your head up, keep moving forward, and I love you guys, man. Let's do this, and this my dyslexic life.